The wind came in low and steady across the prairie, pressing the grass flat like a hand smoothing over a grave. What little light remained of the day caught in the frost on the fence posts and made them shimmer faintly as if mourning. Above, the sky was a dull, bruised gray, thick with snow that had not yet decided to fall. Mara stood by the sagging fence line, one hand gripping the post like it might hold her a prey. Her shawl, thin and worn, did nothing to stop the cold from sinking into her skin. Her boots were cracked and wet. Inside them her toes had gone numb. She did not care. She was counting the chickens again. They were all there, all 6, still alive, still pecking at nothing in the dirt. She turned her face to the field where the soil was too hard to break and the wind too bitter to ignore. The baby had coughed through the night, and the others had taken turns beside the stove. The last of the kindling burned to ash by morning. There was no bread left, no lard, no sugar. The cow had stopped giving milk for days ago, and she did not have the strength to carry water from the creek more than twice a day. Her oldest, Samuel, just 9, had tried hauling the bucket yesterday and dropped it halfway, too weak to lift it again. He had not cried, but his bottom lip had bled where he bit it to keep from doing so. She should have written someone. There were still cousins down in Wichita, a preacher's widow who once offered help, but she hadn't. Pride or foolishness, she didn't know anymore. Letters took time. Letters took hope. Behind her, the house stood silent. A leaning thing of rough wooden thin glass, stitched together by her husband's hands before he rode north to chase work and never came back. 2 winters ago, maybe 3. Time was hard to keep when each day looked like the last and each night longer than she could bear. A crow landed on the fence post beside her and tilted its head. It made no sound. She stared back. If it meant something, an omen, a warning, she no longer knew how to read it. Then came the sound. Faint, but real. A low from beneath the wind. Hooves. Not a memory. Not thunder. Real hooves, crunching over frozen earth. She turned too slowly, the bones in her neck stiff. Down the trail, past the creek, a horse and rider emerged from the blur of dry snow and bare cottonwood. She did not move. The rider came closer, steady and slow, not hurrying, not afraid. He wore a long coat, the color of dust, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. The horse was lean but sure-footed, a sorrel with a white blaze. When the man reached the gate, he dismounted without a word. He looped the reins over the post, not asking permission. She did not speak. She had no voice to offer. Her mouth was dry, cracked at the corners. He took off his hat. His hair was dark with threads of silver, and his face was worn like the land, creased and weather-beaten. He looked at her, not unkindly, then past her, toward the house. "I heard tell there were children starving out this way," he said quietly. "Figured I'd come see." She did not nod, did not shake her head. The words struck like a fist, brutal, unwanted, and true. He waited a breath, maybe 2. Then he stepped to his saddlebag and pulled free a cloth bundle. From it came bread, real bread, dense and warm. He unwrapped it and held it out. She did not take it. "It's yours," he said. Still she didn't move. He did not force her. He stepped past her, slow and respectful, and walked to the door, set the bread down on the stoop. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. She spoke then, just above a whisper. "Why?" He looked at her again, and something passed in his face, not pity, but a kind of knowing. "Because someone once did the same for me." The wind rose again, lifting her all like wings before letting it fall. She watched as he mounted and turned his horse. He didn't look back, rode the way he'd come, disappearing into the gray. She stared at the bread on the stoop, then at the sky. Snow at last began to fall. The bread was gone within minutes, divided into careful slices so each child got a share. Mara had not taken any for herself, but Samuel had insisted, pressing a piece into her hand, whispering, "You have too." She had chewed slowly, the crust rough against her gums, the warmth of it making her eyes water. It was the first time they'd all eaten at once in nearly a week. That night, the baby slept through without coughing. The other two curled against Mara beneath the quilt, their small bodies twitching as the cold settled deeper into the walls. But she did not sleep. She sat up by the stove, eyes locked on the door, as if willing the man to return. He didn't. Not the next day, nor the one after that. But on the third, just as the sun began to rise behind a line of bare hills, he came again. No sound announced him. Mara had stepped out to empty the dishwater, and there he was, leading the horse up the path with a burlap sack slung over the saddle. She did not speak, not at first. Just watch. He lifted the sack down and opened it. Flour, beans, a jar of honey sealed in wax. He didn't look her in the eye when he handed it over. "You got names?" he asked, more softly than she expected. She hesitated, then nodded. "Samuel, Clara, and the baby's Ruth." He nodded back as if to say he would remember. He offered his name only after a beat. "Call me Ellis." The words fell between them, plain and solid, like a bridge that could be crossed if either one of them tried. She looked down at the supplies. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. "I know," he said, "but I'm going to." He didn't stay, not then. Just turned and went, same as before. But the next week he returned again, and this time stayed. Ellis brought nails, a hammer, and a quiet determination. Without asking, he patched the hole in the roof over the kitchen and reinforced the steps that groaned under too much weight. Samuel followed him around like a shadow, asking questions about tools, about horses, about anything, just to keep the silence from returning. Clara watched from the window at first, skeptical, arms crossed. But by the end of that week she was sitting beside him on the porch, handing him nails and humming under her breath. Mara kept her distance at first. She was not soft by nature anymore. The years had scraped that part of her clean away. But she watched him, how he moved slow and careful, never demanding thanks. How he nodded to the children like they were people, not burdens. How he tied his horse with a long lead so it could graze without feeling trapped. One morning she found him standing beside the well, looking out over the field with a far-off expression, the kind men got when they were trying not to remember something. "You got family?" she asked. His face tightened, just a little. "Had. Long time ago." She didn't press. She only nodded, and for a while they stood in silence together, watching the light rise over the brittle earth. Over the next weeks a rhythm formed. Not quite a friendship. Not yet. But something in between. He would arrive before noon and stay past dusk. They worked together sometimes, clearing stones from the field or sewing patches into the roof. Mara saw how his hands were thick with scars, how his knuckles cracked in the cold. He smelled faintly of horses and pipe smoke and something else, cedar maybe, something old and steady. She cooked again, not just broth but real food, flatbread, beans stewed with salt and pepper. She ate too. Slowly, the color returned to her cheeks. The children laughed more often. Ruth started standing on her own, holding to the edge of the chair. One evening after the sun had dipped low, Ellis lingered. Samuel had already gone to bed, and Clara was dozing beside the stove. Mara stood at the table, drying her hands on a cloth. "You should sleep," he said. She nodded, but didn't move. He paused. "Then you remind me of someone. My sister, maybe. The way you hold everything in." Her hands stilled. "And where is she?" "Buried. Up near Billings. Took sick one winter. I can't get back in time." The silence between them stretched. A long breath. A fragile truth. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked down. "Me too." They didn't say more. But the stillness was different now. Less heavy. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft and slow. She watched it through the window while Ellis stepped outside and lit his pipe. The world was still cool. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like maybe, just maybe, it wasn't only cruel. The horizon holds more subscribed to see it. The fog came late that year. It crept in quiet and slow, as if afraid to announce itself too soon. The snow melted in thin veins across the field, revealing patches of earth dark as old blood. Water trickled from the eaves in steady drips. The chickens began laying again. The cow bawled louder in the mornings, restless with hunger, but breathing easier in the softer air. Mara moved differently now. Still guarded, still weary, but no longer hollow. There was weight in her footsteps again, purpose in her hands. She had begun cleaning the back room, her husband's old space, sorting what was left of his tools. His boots, the cracked leather belt she couldn't bear to throw off. She said little about him. Not to Ellis, not to the children. But one day, as she stood in the doorway of that room, she whispered, "He didn't mean to leave." Ellis only nodded. He didn't ask for more. They worked the land together, turning soil to stubborn to yield. Ellis showed Samuel how to hold a hoe without blistering his palms. Clara helped pull stones from the earth, stacking them at the edge of the field like sentries guarding something sacred. Ruth crawled now, strong and fast, her giggles lifting over the dirt like birdsong. And still, Ellis stayed. He spoke more as the days grew longer. Not stories exactly, but pieces of his life. Born in a mining camp in Nevada. Lost his mother to fever before he could remember her. Rode freight trains at 16. A sister who raised him until she married. A war he never wanted to join. And a ranch he tried to build before the bank took it back. "You ever think about going back?" Mara asked once, brushing hair from her face as she tied bundles of kindling. "Back where?" "To wherever you came from. Before all this." He shook his head. "There's nothing back there for me. Not anymore." That was all he said. But something flickered behind it. Not regret. Something quieter. A grief long settled, no longer sharp, but present just the same. One night in early spring, as the wind rose over the hills and the sky turned that particular shade of bruised blue before a storm, a man came to the house. He arrived on foot, shoulders hunched, clothes clean but fine. His boots were polished for the road. Mara opened the door with Ruth on her hip and the others behind her. The man removed his hat, polite, but his eyes slid past her into the house. "In looking for Mr. Ellis Carter," he said. Ellis stepped from the side of the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face changed. Not surprise, not fear, just stillness. "Clayton," he said flatly. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Been looking for you." Mara felt the shift in Ellis without needing to ask. His shoulders straightened, jaw set. But he did not move forward. "You know I can't let it go," Clayton said. "You ran off with what was yours." "I took what was owed," Ellis replied. "That ain't how the law sees it." Ellis stepped closer. "Then the law can come out here and take it back." Clayton glanced at Mara, at the house, at the children. A slow smile spread on his lips. "You've got yourself a nice little situation, don't you?" Something in Mara bristled. Not raised, it just held it, one hand firm on the handle, the other steady at her side. Her eyes never left the man. "You're not wanted here," she said. Clayton let out a low chuckle. "Well, ain't this something?" Ellis took another step. He didn't raise his voice. "You've said your piece. Now go." For a moment, it seemed the man might push further, but the silence was heavier than him. The wind carried it across the field like a warning. He looked at Ellis one last time, tipped his hat toward no one in particular, and turned. He walked away without another word. That night, they didn't speak of it, but Ellis didn't sleep in the barn. He stayed by the stove, boots off, coat folded on the chair. Samuel curled against him in the early hours, and Mara, sitting nearby, did not tell him to move. The storm passed by morning, but something had shifted between them, like the thawed ground underfoot, soft, uncertain, but ready to take seed. Spring came in fits. One day warm enough to open the windows, the next cold enough to freeze the water in the basin. But the days grew longer, and the air no longer carried the bite of despair. They planted late. The soil, though stubborn, took to the seeds. Ellis showed Samuel how to press beans deep enough they wouldn't dry out, and Clara helped lay string along the rows, measuring each with exacting pride. Mara worked beside them, arms bare to the elbow, nails black with earth. Her body ached each night, but it was a welcome kind of ache earned, not endured. Ellis built a coop for the hens, reinforced the shed, fenced off a new garden patch where the grass grew thicker, richer. He never spoke of leaving, and Mara never asked if he planned to. One night, when the wind was gentle and the moon full over the plain, he brought out an old fiddle from his saddlebags. It was cracked near the neck and smelled of oil and smoke. He didn't explain how he'd come by it. just tightened the strings, tested the bow with a few slow strokes, and began to play. Not loud, not bright, just a low, aching tune that wound through the rafters and made the children go quiet. Ruth rested her cheek against Mara's shoulder and stared into the dark. Even the fire stilled. After a time, Ellis stopped. The silence afterward felt softer somehow. Mara looked at him across the room. "Where do you learn?" "My mother," he said. "When I was little, before she got sick." She nodded. Nothing more needed saying. The next weeks passed without trouble. The barn held steady through a spring storm. Clara turned 10 and baked her own cake with honey and wild berries. Samuel carved a wooden spoon for Ruth and gave it to her like it was gold. Then, in the middle of May, Clayton returned. This time he wasn't alone. 2 riders came with him, younger men in stiff coats, guns at their sides, and eyes that swept the land like they already owned it. They didn't come to the house. Not yet. They waited down by the creek, their horses tied loosely, smoke from their fire curling into the sky. Ellis saw them first. He came back from the fields with his face like stone. "They're not just here to talk," he told Mara. "What do they want?" "To drag me back. There's a claim in Texas, an old one, but official enough. Clayton wants what he thinks I took." "Did you?" Ellis met her eyes. "Not from him. I walked away from a deal when I saw what it really was. He lost money, blamed me for it. The law didn't care much for the truth." Mara looked toward the creek, toward the riders. "Are they waiting for night?" "Maybe. Or for me to run." She stepped back inside, picked up Ruth, who was watching with wide, silent eyes. "You're not running." Ellis didn't answer. But that night, he didn't sleep. Neither did she. Just before dawn, Mara took the axe and set it by the door. Then she walked outside, wrapped in her shawl, and stood at the edge of the yard as the men stirred. "You want to take something from us," she said, voice clear. "You'll have to do it in front of my children. And I won't forget your face." The youngest rider stood, startled. Clayton didn't rise, just gave a tired smile, like a cheaty scene too many stands like this to be moved. "You think you can scare me off, Mrs.?" "No," she said, "but I don't scare easy either." Behind her, the barn door opened. Ellis stepped out, rifle slung over his shoulder. Not raised, just resting. He stood beside her, saying nothing. And then came something unexpected. Samuel, with his boots on the wrong feet, carrying a bucket of stones. Clara holding the heavy broom with both hands. Even Ruth, clinging to the edge of the doorframe, watching. They did not speak. They just stood there, a line of small eyes between the land and the threat. Clayton looked at them, then at Ellis. "You've made your point," he said finally. "But this isn't done." Ellis didn't flinch. "It is here." The men left by midday. The fire was stamped out, and the sound of their horses faded into the hills. That night, Mara wept for the first time since the snow. Not because of fear, because they'd made it through, because someone had stood with her, because they weren't alone anymore. By the time summer took hold, the land had turned the color of rust and wheat. The wind carried dust now, not frost, and the creak of the well rope was the only sound for long stretches of the afternoon. But inside the house there was motion, rhythmic, purposeful. The days began early and ended late, full of work that left them tired in a good way. The kind of tired that felt like building something. Ellis never said he was staying. He simply didn't leave. His things remained in the barn, but more and more he was in the house, fixing a shutter, rubbing Clara's sore back after she fell from the fence, helping Samuel send the new tool handles smooth. At night he sat with Ruth on his lap while Mara read from the old Bible with the cracked spine. Not out of piety, just out of habit. The rhythm of the words soothed them all. Still, Mara waited. Someday she would catch him staring out toward the far hills, his jaw set like he was bracing for something. She didn't ask, but she felt the weight of it all the same. One morning, just after sunrise, she found him at the fence line sharpening his knife. The air was still cool, the light pale. "I can't keep them from coming," he said. She stood beside him. "Clayton?" He nodded. "Men like him don't quit, even when they've got no right. I've got no paper, no proof, just what I carry and what I built here." She looked toward the barn, the field, the small life they patched together. "You built more than that," she said. He shook his head. "But If they come with the lure Ella this time, I won't have a say. Mara didn't answer right away. The thought of losing him scraped something raw inside her, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Well, say something, she said finally. Well, stand in front of them again. He glanced at her. And if that's not enough? She hesitated, then lifted her chin. Then we run. His face twitched. A small thing, but it broke the tension in his shoulders, and he let out a slow breath. You do that. I've done worse, she said. I buried my husband with one arm holding a baby and the other keeping the stove warm. I've gone to bed hungry so my children wouldn't. I've waited for a man who never came back and raised 3 children in the dark. You think a road is going to stop me? Ellis looked at her then, really looked, and something softened in his eyes. Not surprise, not gratitude, recognition, like maybe, for the first time, he understood that he wasn't alone either. He reached out, slow, and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. They didn't kiss. Not yet, but the space between them held something fuller than silence. That afternoon they loaded the wagon with grain sacks, old tools, and canned beans just in case. They kept it by the barn quiet and ready, not because they planned to leave, but because they needed to know they could. But the days passed and no one came. No riders on the horizon, no lawyers, no papers, just heat and work and laughter in the evenings. One night, Ellis brought out a small box wrapped in cloth. Mara raised an eyebrow as he handed it to her. What's this? He didn't answer, just nodded at it. Inside was a ring, thin, silver, and old, the shape of a feather carved into the band, worn smooth in places but still beautiful. My mother's, he said quietly. She said to give it to someone who didn't flinch when the hard days came. Mara didn't cry, not exactly, but she held the ring in her hand for a long time before sliding it on her finger. Then I reckon it's mine now, she said. That night they sat on the porch as the children slept. The stars were clear. The moon hung low and full, lighting the yard like a lantern. Ellis's hand brushed hers, and this time she didn't wait. She leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself believe in the morning. Summer deepened, thick and relentless. The heat clung to the skin, soaked into the wood of the house, and pressed against the lungs like a damp cloth. But the fields held. The beans sprouted straight and sturdy. The hens kept laying. The cow, though old and ornery, gave milk enough to stretch between the children and the bread. Inside, the house had changed. Mara caught herself humming now, just under her breath as she stirred a pot or swept the floor. Ellis carved a cradle for Ruth and repaired the cracked windowsill in the kitchen with a care that made it seem like holy work. In the evenings they sat close, not always touching, but always near. The children thrived in the new rhythm. Samuel took to shadowing Ellis from sunrise to dusk, asking about cattle, about fencing, about how to track storms by the smell of the wind. Clara tended the garden, her hands always dirty, her eyes full of questions she'd stopped being afraid to ask. Ruth toddled now, chasing the dog around the yard, her laughter sharp and wild as a jay bird's call. One evening, as they sat under the porch roof watching a dry lightning storm crackle on the horizon, Ellis spoke low. There's a deed in Abilene, he said, to a parcel west of here. About 40 acres. Overgrown now, but good soil. I never signed it. The bank held it while I paid. I was close before I was. Mara leaned her arms on her knees. You think it's still there? Maybe. Could be Clayton tried to claim it. Could be it's gone. She looked at him, her voice steady. Then let's find out. The next week, they hitched the wagon and made the ride, just the two of them, leaving the children with an older widow Mara trusted. The trip took a day and a half. The road was rough, the sun unmerciful, but neither of them complained. Not once. In Abilene, Ellis walked into the land office with a paper in one hand and Mara's quiet faith at his back. They came out hours later, dusty and drained, but with a slip in hand, still in his name. Ellis didn't speak until they were halfway home. He held the paper like it might vanish if he squeezed it tight. It's not much, he said. It'll take years. Mara looked out at the prairie rolling past, the grass all in gold in the sun. I've lived off less, she said. They made plans. quiet one, spoken at night while Ruth snored and the wind moved gently through the house. A well would need digging, a barn raised. There'd be no rush, no need. The land where they lived now, Mara's land, would still be home. But they would build something together, stone by stone, year by year. In August, Mara found herself ill for days. Sickness came with the heat sometimes, and she thought nothing of it at first. But the nausea didn't pass, nor did the dizziness. One morning she sat on the porch with Ruth asleep against her chest and knew. She waited until evening, until the stars came out, and Ellis had finished washing the tools from the day. "I'm carrying," she said simply. He turned, slow. "Are you sure?" She nodded once. He didn't speak right away, just came to her, knelt beside the chair, and placed a hand on her knee. Then he looked up. "Good," he said. She breathed out, then laughed, soft and shaky. "That's all?" He smiled, that rare, quiet smile of his that started in his eyes. Only thing to say. Later, she lay beside him in the dark, his arm around her waist, her hand resting over his. "You afraid?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "No, not of this." She closed her eyes. Outside, the night was warm but not cruel. The moon was rising over the hills. Somewhere in the field a coyote called out, and from the barn came the steady, safe shuffle of the horse moving in its stall. They had no guarantees, no promises of peace or permanence, but they had land and work and one another. And in this hard world that was enough. The first frost came early that year, curling the edges of the leaves and painting the windows white before dawn. Mara woke with her hands tucked around her belly, now round and heavy with the new life growing inside her. The baby kicked just once, firm and sure, like it knew the world it was coming into and wasn't afraid. Ellis had already gone out, smoke rising from the chimney and the smell of wood smoke clinging to the rafters. The children were still sleeping, tangled in quilts, faces soft and slack with trust, the kind of trust Mara hadn't known could exist before Ellis came, the kind that said, "We are safe, we are home." She moved slower now. Everything took longer. Carrying water, kneading bread, bending to pick up Ruth, who still hadn't learned the word no, but had learned how to climb the kitchen table when Mara's back was turned. But Mara didn't mind the ache. It reminded her of what she had earned, of what she had chosen. Ellis skipped building. Taken to rising before the sun, hitching the wagon, and hauling salvaged wood from a ranch to valleys over wood given freely by a neighbor who'd heard what they were doing and wanted to help. Laid the foundation himself, hands raw, shoulders taut, but with a patience that seemed born from something deeper than skill. He didn't talk much about the house they were building. He just worked. Sometimes Mara would ride out to him, Ruth in her lap, Samuel walking alongside the horse, asking questions about walls and beams and shingles. Ellis would stop, lift Ruth into his arms, and listen carefully to every word Samuel spoke, like it all mattered. By the end of October, the frame stood, just the bones of a home. For walls, no roof. But it caught the sun in a way that made Mara's throat catch. She stood inside the skeleton of it one afternoon, wind brushing her cheeks, and imagined where the table might go, where the cradle would rest, where her children's feet would run. She turned to Ellis, who was watching her with quiet eyes. "Looks like a house," she said. He nodded. "Ours." It was the first time Hed said it out loud. "Ours." She walked to him and took his hand. Not shy, not uncertain. "You ever think about making it legal?" she asked. His brow creased. "You mean?" "I mean marry me." He let out a short, surprised breath. Not laughter, but close. "You'd have me?" he asked. "I already do," she said. But he'd like the name to match. The wedding was simple. Just them, the children, and a preacher from 3 towns over who had to borrow a horse to get there. They stood under the bare beams of the new house. The wind sharpened clean around them, and said their vows with hands clasped and eyes steady. Samuel wore boots too big for him, and held Russ's hand like a grown man. Clara cried when the preacher finished, wiping her nose on her sleeve and whispering, "Mama's not alone anymore." They ate cornbread to that night. Mara lit every candle they owned and let the fire burn hot, even if it cost them extra wood. She sat on the floor with her family around her, Ellis's hand resting on her back, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, something fuller, rooted. That winter the storms came hard. Snow piled against the walls and the roof groaned under the weight. But they were ready. The barn held. The children stayed warm. Ellis taught Samuel how to check the traps, how to read the sky. Clara learned to sew properly and made new socks for Ruth, who refused to keep them on. At night they played cards, told stories, and waited for the baby. In early February, just before sunrise, Mara woke Ellis with a whisper and a tightened jaw. "It's time," she said. He didn't panic, just lit the lamp, stoked the fire, and woke Clara, who had been practicing for weeks how to heat water and fetch towels without crying. The labor was long, harsh, but no longer unfamiliar. Mara grit her teeth and bore down, Ellis at her side the whole time, his hand wrapped in hers until her grip left bruises. When the baby came, the room went still. Then the cry, "Hey girl." Ellis took her gently, wrapped her in a soft cloth, and placed her in Mara's arms like he was handing over something sacred. They named her Hope. Outside, the wind howled across the plain. Inside, the house glowed with warmth, and in the corner by the fire, Mara rested her head against Ellis's shoulder. Her children curled around her like roots in deep soil, and let the world be good for once, for real, and without fear. The trail calls again. Subscribe and answer.